So, a couple weeks ago, I put out a video talking about Concord and some of the contributing factors that I believed to be the sole reasons as to why the game failed. Well, since I uploaded that video, more details have come out about Concord, and the situation is far worse than we initially thought. I won't go into Ryan Ellis, the director, and him stepping down from his leadership at Firewalk, nor will I be focusing too much on staff preparing for layoffs and Firewalk's possible closure. No, the second those news stories broke on September 19th, something awful clearly went down during Concord's development, and Colin Moriarty broke details the next day as to what went on behind the scenes. On September 20th, 2024, Moriarty posted on Twitter a clip from his podcast, Sacred Symbols, stating he had spoken to someone who was close during Concord's development. His source stated that Concord cost $400 million to make, saw major internal support from Sony to where it was being put on a pedestal by co-CEO Herman Hulst, and deemed the game as the future of PlayStation, and that Firewalk enforced a work culture that was essentially, quote,
a toxic positivity vibe. You weren't allowed to say anything, apparently internally, about this game. About how, something's wrong with it, character designs are not right, and so on and so forth. They really, truly believe this was Herman Hulst's baby, apparently.
Now, I know most people are probably focusing on one of two things. Yeah, $400 million? $400 million. Are you insane? Apparently, Concord had already cost Firewalk and probably Monsters, their now ex-parent company, $200 million by early 2023. The game had already spent roughly 7 years in development at this point. Sony stepped in shortly after, forked over $200 million themselves, and proceeded to outsource pieces of development just to fix what was broken or missing. And keep in mind, this money wasn't even put towards acquiring the studio. This is $200 million just for the game. We still don't know how much money Sony paid to acquire Firewalk from probably Monsters. Yet, they were totally comfortable spending nearly half the budget for Spider-Man 2 on a game like Concord. The other aspect I'm sure folks are zeroing in on is the sheer naive confidence Sony had in Concord. Again, this was a game that Sony was calling the future of PlayStation, with Herman Hulst himself being a purveyor for the game. More on him in a little bit. Not only that, but Sony supposedly believed the game had the same potential as Star Wars? Dudes, this isn't 1977 anymore. We're in 2024. That kind of language alone, though, says a lot to me about where some folks' heads were at, and it was not in the space of genuine passion. To me, that is such an absurd level of ego inflation we have not seen since Anthem. For those who don't know, BioWare gave Anthem the codename of Project Dylan because they believed the game would achieve the same legacy as folk singer Bob Dylan. I also saw this back when I used to do movie reviews for a completely different website, which I don't think they have my stuff there anymore, but I did a review on this movie called The Gallows, and I remember the marketing tried comparing their villain to Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger. The Gallows ended up becoming one of the worst movies that had come out that year. You simply cannot gas yourself up like this. I have always found this kind of talk to be just totally superficial, recklessly optimistic, and ultimately, it sets you up for total humiliation. Never does this level of comparison pan out the way these executives and managers think. It only encourages you to rest on your laurels and never think about, well, what if it doesn't go that way? And when you try to compare yourselves to much bigger IPs, you end up looking like a total idiot. But I want to focus more on that toxic positivity part. That part right there is exactly what I gathered from my time with Concord. As I said in my video, I had reason to believe that Firewalk was never told no during Concord's development. It wasn't told no, you can't make a hero shooter. It wasn't told no, these characters aren't working, you need to go back to the drawing board. The haphazard character design and lack of refinement in game feel told me that throughout development, Firewalk was just never told to go back to the drawing board, never told to fix or tweak something, never told no. And what Moriarty's source told him regarding toxic positivity further cements my belief. Again, as Moriarty stated from his source,
you weren't allowed to say anything, apparently internally, about this game. About how, like, something's wrong with it, character designs are not right, and so on and so forth.
Even one of Kotaku's own staff members corroborated on this specific portion. Look, let me fill you in for those of you who have never taken an art class, okay? When you take an art class, one of the very first things you need to learn is that you will constantly be told to try and try and try again. Constructive criticism will often point you in the direction of putting out your best work, and your teachers will make damn sure of that. They will. So no, your first character design is not going to be the best, nor is it going to be acceptable. Your second may not be either, nor will your third or even your fourth. Making good art requires rigorous drafting and revising. That is why you're supposed to do rough sketches first and iron out details as you find, like, new forms to work with. You worry about color and texture later. You get the bones right before you slap on the meat and skin to tie it all together. And much of where Concord failed can be traced back to the art. Characters and environments are the first thing players attach to when watching your game's trailer and when booting up a game. You need good color schemes. You need good themes. You need compelling motifs. A lot of things that give your game an identity you need. And with Concord, there was just clearly no vision, with color schemes all over the place, environments looking generic as hell. There was no vision. There was no focus to tell the artists what the game needs to look like, what the feel needs to be, nothing. It almost seems like, and I know that this might be far-fetched to suggest, but it almost seems like first drafts were accepted without question, or egos were inflated because we worked on Destiny. And some of that attitude can kind of be seen in how some of Firewalk's own staff were talking to people on Twitter, but I prefer not to get into that sort of drama. And hey, I get it. If I truly wanted to make an astronaut look like a living pair of work pants and spent weeks or months making that one character, maybe I would have some level of attachment to it. No one wants to work hard only for it to amount to nothing. And people online can absolutely be stupid, because a lot of people online think I don't like it because it's bad is an acceptable form of criticism when such a statement explains nothing. I saw some of that vitriol firsthand when I put out my video about Concord. If it wasn't someone arguing about their own dumbass personal politics, it was someone trying to take the piss out of my channel's stats. Which, by the way, I am a small channel. So, I never thought somebody would actually care a great deal about my analytics enough to comment about my like ratio. But if you're one of those people, just know that if you really do care about stats, then you should care about this. You disliking my video does nothing. So long as you interact with my video in some way, I get a boost in exposure and YouTube throws my video to even more people, which only further grows my channel. So your petty spite is doing the opposite of what you're wanting it to do. But anyways, moving on. However, in the creative field, criticism is the biggest key to getting your best work out of you. You need to ask peers, you need to ask friends, you need to ask anybody you know who will be honest with you and tell you if something needs work. There's no boo-hoo about it, there's no crying because, oh, I worked so hard on this and someone said it was bad. You need to find anybody with a brain that can properly point out why something isn't working in their eyes, and you need to consider it. A workplace that views constructive criticism as saying something negative simply has no business working in a creative field. At all. And if that is truly how Firewalk was operating the entire 8 years that Concord spent in development, I don't know how much longer I'd be keeping them around. Art demands criticism, and it can only ever flourish when professionals and reasonable minds can identify and explain why something isn't working without taking it personally. And if anyone should have been hypercritical of a project like this, it should have been Sony. This was a major publisher and platform holder that was so confident in this game that it believed Concord was going to be the next Star Wars. Are you kidding me? Really? Star Wars-like potential? Sony believed in Concord so much that it deemed it as the future of PlayStation, with Hermen Hulst championing it behind the scenes, according to Moriarty's source. No, he did not praise it in an interview, by the way. The screenshot you're probably referring to or thinking about is fake. Although his praise does have me wondering why Hermen Hulst is in charge of PlayStation Studios and having Sony invest in games like Concord. I'm not one to cry out, let the creatives lead, but when I look at Hulst's credits as listed on Moby Games, I have to ask, why him? I don't think he should be fired. I just don't understand how a managing director found himself as the co-CEO of PlayStation. That's really all he's done. Look at this. The only game he ever directed was Killzone Liberation on PSP, and yes, that was a good game. That's the only time you actually worked on a game and not just managed teams. The reason this confuses me is because in my decade-long career writing about games, developers, and publishers, there is a pattern I've seen in many people's careers. Hideaki Itsuno didn't just start as director of Power Stone, Devil May Cry, and Dragon's Dogma. He started as a planner on a quiz game that Capcom spat out in 1994. Katsuhiro Harada started as a mere consultant during development of the first 2 Tekken games, and he was a voice actor for them. He didn't just suddenly appear and say, I'm the producer now, these are my games.
Shut up! Shut up and sit the head down! And don't ask me for shit.
Now, he's one of the major heads running Bandai Namco Entertainment. The late Satoru Iwata, a programmer before he became the president of Nintendo. Todd Howard, credited for design and writing for various Bethesda games in the 90s before kicking the door down and proving his worth as a director in the 2000s with Elder Scrolls Morrowind and Oblivion. Now, he's executive producer for Bethesda Game Studios. Amy Hennig, designer and artist before she took her first directing role with Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver and eventually becoming the creator of Uncharted. And lastly, Neil Druckmann, once a gameplay programmer for Jak 3 and Jak X Combat Racing before going on to make a worldwide phenomenon in The Last of Us and becoming the head of Naughty Dog. These are all developers who were in the trenches at one point. They were one of the many grunts directly working on these games and understood what made a video game enjoyable. Along the way came the lessons of business, marketing, PR, etc., which would only further boost sales for their respective projects and add to their perspective on what makes video games sell. And each of them would eventually rise up to become major leaders at their respective companies. I didn't mention it earlier, but Amy Hennig is working at Skydance New Media and is leading the charge on a brand new Marvel game. That's kind of a big deal, considering her roots, you know? So when I see that this guy in particular, Hermen Hulst, has only ever done management in game development, well, good on him. I'd still keep him on my team for running PlayStation Studios and delegating game releases and managing teams, but to decide what projects get greenlit, what teams to invest in, and the like, and you come back with a game like Concord? I'm sorry, but what about this game said to you that this was going to sell in 2024? What about Firewalk Studios told you that Sony absolutely needs this team to strengthen PlayStation as a brand? It is critical that we have them under our brand. Was there any other game that needed $200 million that we could have invested in and made bank on by now? Anything from our pre-existing studios? What about third-party partners? Maybe we can strike a deal for marketing rights for various projects. Maybe we can find a really good pool of indie studios to start churning out smaller projects in between our big releases. Folks might throw their wallets at us for a 2D Sly Cooper spinoff that might only cost us $10 million with a small team. That gives us $190 million for other projects to invest in while we wait for Naughty Dog to finish Last of Us 3. Concord simply feels like one massive opportunity taken for thousands of other, smaller, but possibly more profitable opportunities lost. Hey, it's just like the Bungie acquisition and how we lost that Last of Us Online game. Now, is all of this really Hermen Hulst's fault and his alone? No, of course not. I think his position in leadership is odd, but we all make bad judgment calls sometimes. I mean, I bought Fallout 76 for $60 when it came out in 2018. Sometimes the big wig with the big money is also getting hoodwinked just like we are. But until somebody spills the beans, none of us will ever know what truly went down behind the closed doors. None of us will know what was said exactly that got Sony to acquire Firewalk in the first place. None of us will know how Concord convinced Sony to invest $200 million into the project after already wasting $200 million in the span of 7 years. But clearly, there were some folks in higher positions who probably should have never been there in the first place. Not when the workplace was labeling constructive criticism as negativity. Not when two companies had $400 million at stake. And definitely not when the market is way more competitive than it was back in 2016. Back when this whole train got moving. And frankly, if I was running Sony, I'd be grabbing the biggest damn microscope possible and throwing everybody under it.